The strange saga of Delaware's dog hair ban. If you were to stroll into Delaware today and ask a random local whether it is legal to sell dog hair in their state, you might expect confusion, laughter, or perhaps a skeptical eyebrow raised so high it nearly reaches Pennsylvania. But Delawareans, polite and practical as ever, would likely answer you with something along the lines of, "Well, funny you should ask." Because buried neatly inside Delaware's legal code is a statute so oddly specific, so wonderfully peculiar, and yet so undeniably real that it has baffled residents and visitors alike for decades. It is illegal to sell dog hair in Delaware. Not discouraged, not frowned upon. Flat out illegal. The law sits there, calm and confident, as if it has every reason in the world to exist. And in a sense, it does, at least if you understand the strange, winding path of history that led to its creation. But to appreciate how Delaware, a state known for corporate registrations, beautiful beaches and tax-friendly policies, ended up prohibiting an entire market of pooch-derived fibre, one must travel back to the early days of the state's peculiar and occasionally dramatic battles with the world of underground fur trading, questionable crafts, and some very determined dogs who shed enough fur to fill a mattress. The story begins, as these things often do, in a place far removed from legislation and lawyers, the American living room. For reasons no historian can definitively explain, the late 19th and early 20th centuries experienced a sudden, overwhelming rise in the trend of crafting with dog hair. People knitted sweaters, socks, mittens, hats, and in some cases entire winter coats from the soft undercoat of their beloved pets. For families with huskies, malamutes, or Great Pyrenees, this was less a hobby and more a seasonal inevitability. After all, what was one to do with a dog that shed enough hair to insulate a small barn? These early crafters called the material chiengora, a French-sounding term that instantly made it feel more sophisticated, even though it was essentially just dog fluff spun into yarn. For the most part, it was harmless. People wore their dog hair mittens proudly. Some sold them quietly at country fairs. Others gifted them to friends, with the solemn promise that the mittens would keep them warm through blizzards, power outages, and any emotional hardship that only a dog's loyalty could remedy. But as with any trend that captures the hearts of well-meaning hobbyists, a darker market soon emerged. In the decades that followed, reports began trickling through American newspapers about merchants importing dog hair from questionable sources overseas. Rumors circulated of dubious fur traders acquiring dog pelts not from grooming brushes but through means far more sinister. The line between dog hair and dog fur began to blur, and the practice of using canine fibre for commercial products, once quaint, wholesome, and admittedly a little odd, became entangled with ethical concerns that had nothing to do with grandma knitting mittens from Baxter's undercoat. Delaware, ever mindful of emerging markets and occasionally chaotic in its attempts to maintain order, took note. The state had no interest in becoming a hub for murky fur practices, nor did it want to encourage a burgeoning trade whose oversight would require more resources than it cared to expend. So legislators did what legislators do best. They wrote a law. And unlike many pieces of legislation that are drafted, debated, amended, vetoed, revived, contested, or quietly buried beneath 6 layers of procedural dust, this one sails straight into the books with nary a ripple. But the content of the law, its sheer, almost comical specificity, is what places it firmly among the pantheon of America's most wonderfully peculiar statutes. Delaware didn't merely restrict the sale of dog fur. It didn't regulate it, license it, or impose conditions. Instead, it embraced the simplest possible approach. If the fiber comes from a dog, don't sell it. End of story. No exceptions, no loopholes, no wiggle room for entrepreneurial pet groomers, craft enthusiasts, or that one cousin who believes he can turn his golden retriever's shedding problem into a side income. It wasn't that Delaware despised creativity or disliked dogs. On the contrary, Delawareans have always adored their pets. The state simply believed that certain lines shouldn't be crossed, especially lines that might lead to confusion between cruelty-free brushing practices and the far more disturbing world of international fur trading. Better, lawmakers reasoned, to ban the entire commercial market outright than to risk opening the door to practices the state would never condone. Of course, the moment the law passed, it began to take on a life of its own. It trickled into local law, whispered among amused residents who marveled at the absurdity of a rule that in daily life would affect almost no one. Craft stores occasionally received bewildered inquiries from newcomers. "Can I sell this scarf I made from my husky?" "No." "What about this pillow stuffed with Pomeranian fluff?" Still no. "What if I give it away with a donation request?" Nice try. But Delaware law is not fooled by clever semantics. If money changes hands and a dog's hair is involved, the statute draws a firm, unwavering line in the sand. Over time, the law broadened from a practical consumer protection measure into a beloved piece of Delaware trivia. It became a conversation starter at local gatherings, a source of bemusement for amateur historians, and an unexpected delight for writers compiling lists of strange laws across America. And as the internet arrived, bringing with it the golden age of "you won't believe these weird laws," Delaware's dog hair ban surged into fame like a Labrador who has just seen someone open a refrigerator. Yet beneath the humour lies a surprisingly meaningful tale. Delaware's decision was not a knee-jerk reaction to a single incident, nor was it the product of legislative boredom. It was a carefully considered response to a growing international problem, one that threatened to blur ethical lines and cause long-term harm. By drawing a clear boundary, the state preserved both animal welfare and consumer trust. It sacrificed none of its values and maintained its character as a community that seeks fairness, clarity, and practicality, even when the resulting laws are admittedly a bit odd. But the truly fascinating part of the story lies not in the law's creation, nor in its reception, but in the strange ripple effect it created throughout the state. Professional groomers, finding their craft-related creativity legally stifled, stuck to the basics. Pet owners joked that their vacuum cleaners collected contraband. Teenagers dared each other to spin dog hair yarn like rebellious crafters breaking unspoken taboos. And Delaware dogs, blissfully unaware of the revolution swirling around them, continued shedding with the carefree enthusiasm only canines can muster. At the same time, the law gently nudged Delaware's identity in the direction of whimsy. It joined the ranks of odd state laws that reflect a small but undeniable facet of local culture. A blend of practicality, humor, and a willingness to acknowledge that sometimes life and legislation is simply strange. But strange in a way that makes people smile. Strange in a way that invites curiosity. Strange in a way that encourages retelling, not ridicule. Throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, Delaware held firm. Despite changing fashion trends, evolving consumer markets, and even occasional bursts of renewed interest in Chingora among craft enthusiasts online, the state never budged on its stance. Selling dog hair stayed illegal. The law stood tall, unchallenged, unmodified, a monument to Delaware's peculiar sense of order. And people grew to love it, partly for its protective implications, partly for its oddness, and partly because it makes for one of the most delightfully baffling facts one can share about American legislation. The story continues quietly and curiously into the modern day. Delaware's residents still chuckle about their law, crafters still ask questions, and dogs still shed. It remains one of those wonderful intersections where history, legislation, and humor collide, creating a narrative that is as entertaining as it is enlightening. And as we continue through this story, the layers of Delaware's dog hair saga reveal themselves one by one, weaving together a tale that is far richer, far stranger, and far more human than one might expect from a law about shed fluff. As word of Delaware's new and oddly specific prohibition spread across the state, reactions ranged from utter confusion to proud approval. The average citizen, reading the brief announcement printed in the local papers, blinked at it once, blinked at it twice, and then read it again, convinced they must have misunderstood something. Selling dog hair. That was illegal now. People glanced at their dogs, who stared back with their usual mixture of mild curiosity and complete indifference, unaware that they had just become the center of a legal precedent. For many Delawareans, the news initially landed like a joke, told too straight-faced to detect the punchline. But once the story behind the law began circulating, the loophole, the markets, the questionable fur boutiques, and the startling realization that dog fur had been entering the luxury goods ecosystem, the mood shifted from confusion to understanding. The state wasn't banning dog hair because they feared garage sales full of fluffy bags of undercoat. They were banning dog hair because they didn't want Delaware connected to an industry that blurred the line between ethical sourcing and outright deception. The ban quickly became one of those rare laws that everyone agreed with, even if they laughed while agreeing. Ethicists championed it for closing an exploitative loophole. Veterinarians praised it for protecting pets from anyone who might get bright, unscrupulous ideas. Pet owners celebrated it as a small victory in the ongoing mission to ensure dogs remained companions, not commodities. And lawmakers, well, they appreciated that for once they had passed a bill that was both morally upright and publicly delightful. The sudden spotlight on dog hair sparked a wave of unexpected conversations. Radio hosts discussed it with a mix of seriousness and humor, inviting callers to share their thoughts. Some joked that their Labrador's shedding could have made them millionaires if the bill had passed just a few years later. Others confessed they had never even known dog hair had market value, much less that people somewhere were actively purchasing it. A few pet groomers called in to share stories of owners overwhelmed by the enormous tumbleweed-sized piles of fur left behind after grooming sessions. "Trust me," one groomer joked on air, "nobody wants this stuff except vacuum cleaners, and even they complain." Yet beneath the laughter was a sense of relief. Delawareans were proud of their pets. Dogs weren't livestock to be harvested. They weren't raw materials waiting to be collected. They were part of the family, companions, protectors, entertainers, snorers, droolers, and occasional sock thieves. To imagine someone gathering up their fur, packaging it, and selling it to distant companies felt wrong, even if the dogs themselves would never have known the difference. Meanwhile, local fairgrounds began quietly adjusting their vendor guidelines. Craft booths that specialized in yarns or natural fibers added a new line of reassurance, stating that their materials were sheep-derived, alpaca-derived, or plant-based. Theaters performing comedic plays worked the law into punchlines. School children brought it up during civics lessons, asking their teachers why such a strange rule was needed in the first place. In living rooms and over backyard fences, neighbors compared their own theories, some more accurate than others. One of the biggest misconceptions to circulate in those early years was the belief that Delaware had banned the ownership of dog hair, not the sale of it. A few residents grew worried, checking the floors of their homes as though inspectors might burst through the door, demanding to know why there was a tuft of golden retriever fluff under the sofa. Others wondered if brushing their dogs counted as harvesting. Still others wondered if the law applied to manufactured products made elsewhere. The state had to clarify with exceptional patience that merely possessing dog hair was not a crime. Every home with a shedding dog would have been a felony site otherwise. Despite the confusion, Delaware officials remained calm, explaining the law's purpose with steady voices and the gentle tone typically reserved for comforting children or explaining tax forms. They reassured the public that no pet owner would ever face a fine for vacuuming or failing to vacuum too slowly. The ban was solely about commercial sale, preventing Delaware from being a link in any chain of questionable fur production. Strangely enough, the law also inspired a minor but memorable spark of creativity. A handful of local yarn artists, intrigued by the sudden interest in fiber ethics, decided to publicize their work with even more transparency. They invited customers to meet the alpacas behind their yarn, to watch the spinning process, to learn about cruelty-free fiber practices. "Trust us," one joked in her brochure. "No dogs were harmed or brushed in the making of this scarf." The law had inadvertently boosted the visibility of genuine artisans, turning a moment of legal housekeeping into an educational opportunity. Before long, Delaware began to adopt a kind of cultural fondness for the ban. It became a point of pride, a tiny badge of honor the state wore with a smirk. Larger states had flashy headlines, massive tech laws, enormous tax debates, sweeping environmental policies. Delaware had a dog hair ban, quiet and oddly charming. It was a law that made people smile before they nodded respectfully. And that, in a strange way, made it unforgettable. By the time the dog hair ban had settled into the fabric of Delaware life, the law had become something of a cultural inside joke, a piece of legislation that everyone knew existed, and absolutely no one planned on testing. It stood there in the legal code like a quirky piece of antique furniture, too interesting to throw out, too harmless to replace, and possessing just enough backstory to keep people endlessly amused. But while residents enjoyed the novelty of telling out-of-staters that they lived in a place where selling dog hair was forbidden, the deeper story behind the law continued evolving in ways no one could have expected. One of the most surprising ripple effects came from the craft communities, especially among local spinners, fiber artists, and knitters. Before the law, most of these artisans had never even considered dog fur as a potential material. It simply wasn't on their radar. But once the statute drew attention, people became curious. Not to defy the law, but to understand why anyone in their right mind would want to use dog hair for anything other than vacuum clogging. Workshops formed at festivals, libraries and community centres where fibre artists explained the difference between various types of animal hair, how fibres behaved, and why certain coats worked better for spinning. Visitors often began these workshops with sceptical smiles, convinced that the presenters were merely entertaining a quirky fad. But then they would learn that breeds like the Samoyed produce fur with surprising softness, that some northern breeds shed undercoats with long, smooth fibers, and that historically various cultures had used dog hair woven into blankets and clothing. The revelation was always delivered gently, with humour, and with the important reminder that Delaware's version of history had led them to ban its sale, not its existence. The workshops usually ended with renewed respect for ethical fibre sourcing and a fresh appreciation for the state's unusual stance. At local fairs, the law inspired the creation of novelty displays. Some vendors set up mock, illegal stalls, humorously labelled with signs like contraband coats or Delaware's most wanted fibres. These displays never sold anything illicit. Instead, they showcased posters, trivia sheets, and historical tidbits about the law. Visitors stopped by, chuckling as they read about the rise of questionable fur markets and Delaware's decision to shut it down. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, pointing at the exhibits with wide eyes, asking if people really used to turn their dogs into sweaters. Parents reassured them that no one was shaving the family beagle. The ban had become a story that blended humour and ethics, a rare balance that made it universally engaging. Delaware's educators quickly realized that the law provided a unique opportunity. Civics teachers began weaving it into their lessons as a way of explaining how laws form, how loopholes appear, and why government sometimes needs to intervene in unexpected ways. Instead of boring students with dry legislation, teachers introduced the topic with a dramatic headline: "It is illegal to sell dog hair in Delaware," and watched as confused expressions gave way to curiosity. Students leaned forward, wanting to know why such a law existed and what strange events had led to it. Classroom discussions blossomed. Students debated the ethics of animal products, the responsibility of consumers, and the importance of transparency in business practices. Some argued that as long as a dog was brushed gently and treated well, its fur should be fair game. Others countered that allowing the sale could create incentives for unethical actors and muddy the distinction between cruelty-free fibres and those sourced from questionable origins. The kids weren't just learning about a quirky statute, they were learning about critical thinking, morality, economics, and the power of the legal system to shape behaviour. Meanwhile, dog owners continued embracing the ban with a mix of pride and amusement. Every time their dogs shed enough fur to fill a grocery bag, they joked about having illegal materials on their hands. Neighbours swapped stories about particularly fluffy breeds that seemed intent on carpeting the entire house with their undercoat. Groomers teased customers by pretending to dispose of evidence when sweeping clumps of fur into bins. The entire community found light-hearted ways to weave the law into everyday life, turning an obscure prohibition into a shared cultural moment. But behind the humour was a very real sense of gratitude. The ban had drawn attention to the fact that dogs were, above all else, companions. They were family members who rode in the car with their heads out the window, greeted their people with full-body wiggles, snored loudly during thunderstorms, and rested their chins on laps when begging for scraps. No one wanted to imagine their dog as part of a commercial supply chain. The law acted as a symbolic shield, reassuring everyone that Delaware drew a firm line around the value and dignity of household pets. Over time, the story of the law began to make its way into tourism material, albeit in an understated fashion. Travel writers loved including it in their lists of Delaware fun facts, placing it right beside notes about local beaches, historic landmarks, and famous foods. Visitors chuckled when they read it, nudging each other and saying things like, "Only in Delaware." Some admitted they had come to the state specifically to see if the law existed, half expecting it to be an urban legend. They left amused but impressed that such a small state had such a big personality. As media coverage grew, journalists reached out to state officials for comments. They expected sheepish answers or rolling eyes, but instead found that Delaware's representatives spoke with quiet confidence. They explained the law's origins, its purpose, and its continued relevance. They acknowledged the humor, but also emphasized the seriousness of preventing unethical fur sourcing. Reporters left with a deeper understanding that while the law may have been whimsical in appearance, its roots were firmly grounded in responsibility. The real charm of the dog hair ban lay not in the statute itself, but in the way it highlighted Delaware's unique relationship with its governance. This was a state that, despite its small size, had always taken its laws seriously, yet had enough personality to embrace the quirky side of its own legal history. The dog hair statute was a perfect example. Delaware had managed to enact a rule that protected pets, prevented exploitation, and sparked public interest, all without creating controversy or inconvenience. It became a model of how even very specific laws could reflect broader values. And as the years went on, Delawareans continued to retell the story, adding color, drama, and a dash of good-natured exaggeration each time. Some recalled the shady fur dealers of decades past with theatrical flair, describing mustachioed merchants who tried to pass off dog hair as luxury textiles. Others described dog breeds with mythical shedding powers, claiming that certain huskies could single-handedly produce illegal quantities of fluff. None of these tales were strictly accurate, but they added to the mythos, turning a practical law into a local legend. Whenever travellers brought up the law at restaurants or pubs, the conversation always followed the same delightful arc. First came disbelief. No way that's real. Then came curiosity. But why would anyone sell dog hair? Finally came appreciation. Okay, That actually makes sense. And by the end of the night, the visitors would be repeating the story with the same fond tone as the locals, carrying the tale back to their own states like a tiny souvenir. In this way, the dog hair ban did more than regulate commerce. It changed Delaware's identity. It gave residents a shared story, something charming and unexpected to bond over. It fostered conversations about ethics, commerce, and community. It reminded everyone that the law is not just a cold set of rules. It can be a reflection of who people are, what they value, and what they choose to protect. And through it all, Delaware remained proud of its decision. The law stayed in place, unaltered, quietly doing its job. It didn't need updating or revising. It simply existed, a stable guardrail ensuring that the state's furry family members remained just that, family. As the decades continued unfolding, Delaware's dog hair ban transitioned from a curiosity of local culture into something resembling a regional legend. An odd, endearing whisper from the past that never entirely faded. Every generation discovered it anew, often through the same pattern. Someone stumbled across a Quirky Laws article online, read a single line stating it is illegal to sell dog hair in Delaware, blinked once in disbelief, and immediately sought confirmation. And when they discovered it was indeed real, the reaction was always the same mix of amusement, intrigue, and a faint sense of pride that their small state had found such a uniquely humane way to draw a line in the sand. But the law didn't just exist in dusty legal codes or online trivia lists. It lived inside stories, jokes, public imagination, and even the subtle rhythms of everyday life. The more people talked about it, the more Delawareans found themselves reflecting on how the ban had shaped their relationship with their pets, their crafts, and their sense of ethical responsibility. And although few would have predicted it, the law began to influence the way the state thought about animals in general, extending its impact far beyond the world of fiber arts and grooming salons. Residents described their dogs not just as companions, but as individuals whose value could never be reduced to something as transactional as selling their hair. When a neighbour's Malamute walked down the sidewalk, leaving behind a trail of fluff swirling gently in the breeze, people smiled and said, "Natural, legal littering." When a groomer swept up a mountain of fur the size of a hay bale after brushing out a Newfoundland, someone would invariably joke, "You better hide that. The state might think you're planning to open a black market sweater factory." These comments, repeated thousands of times across countless small moments, gradually evolved into a quiet, cultural understanding. The ban was less about preventing commerce and more about affirming that dogs were not commodities. The state's historical archives began receiving more questions about the law, especially from students and researchers working on quirky law projects or documentaries exploring unusual American regulations. Archivists went digging into letters, legislative notes and newspaper clippings, trying to piece together the full story behind the ban. They found debates about fur ethics, confusion over mislabeled textiles, concerns from veterinarians, and a surprising number of humorous editorials from the time. Delaware's newspapers had embraced the topic with gusto, running opinion pieces that balanced genuine concern with playful jabs at the absurdity of the situation. Editorial cartoons depicted dogs wearing sunglasses and refusing to sign modelling contracts. One cartoon showed a dog in a trench coat offering a bag of fur under a street lamp to a bewildered shopper. These old images resurfaced online, going mildly viral again and again as people rediscovered how delightfully strange the moment had been. Interestingly, animal shelters and rescue groups found themselves benefiting indirectly from the law's notoriety. When discussing animal welfare, they often mentioned the ban as an example of how seriously Delaware took the protection of pets. It helped frame the state's culture as one deeply connected to the well-being of dogs, and donors responded warmly to that sentiment. Fundraising events leaned into the theme, with charity runs urging participants to keep Delaware fur-free, at least commercially, and merchandise emblazoned with slogans like, "My dog's hair belongs on my couch, not the market." Dog trainers, too, found the law popping up in unexpected places. During puppy classes, when owners joked about the endless shedding of certain breeds, trainers would grin and respond with the classic Delaware reassurance, "Good news, your home is full of love, not contraband." Over time, these small interactions collectively shaped the region's light-hearted but protective attitude toward pets. It was a kind of cultural osmosis, subtle and powerful, and it reinforced the idea that Delaware's dogs lived in one of the most thoughtfully pet-friendly environments in the country. Meanwhile, local historians and amateur researchers delved deeper into the broader context of the era when the law was passed. They studied fur markets, international trade, and the rise of consumer watchdog organizations fighting against deceptive labeling. It became clear that Delaware's ban wasn't just a quirky footnote, it was part of a much larger shift in American consciousness. The nation was becoming more aware of where consumer goods came from, how animals were treated, and what ethical boundaries should exist in the world of textiles. Some states responded with vague guidelines, others with stricter regulations on fur sourcing and labeling. Delaware responded with a precise, unambiguous rule that targeted a specific loophole, and that distinct clarity inadvertently created one of the most memorable laws in the country. In small towns across the state, barbershops, cafes, and corner stores had their own interpretations of the law's significance. Some saw it as a symbol of community values, others as a funny quirk that gave Delaware personality. Coffee shop regulars debated whether the ban should apply to extremely hairy humans. barbers joked about the legality of sweeping up their floors. Children running lemonade stands pretended to put up signs promising "no dog hair used here," just to make their parents laugh. The law was woven into the tapestry of daily humor and folklore. Every so often, newcomers to the state would approach their veterinarians with hesitant questions, wondering aloud if brushing their dog too aggressively might somehow be illegal. The vets always responded with patience and warmth, assuring them that the law targeted sales, not grooming, and reminding them that unless they had plans to open a canine fur boutique, they had nothing to fear. These conversations often ended with shared laughter and an immediate feeling of belonging, as though the ban served as a handshake welcoming new residents into Delaware's unique personality. The law even influenced local literature and storytelling. Writers incorporated it into novels, weaving it into small details about characters, towns, and cultural quirks. Poets used it as a metaphor for protecting innocence or preserving authenticity. Comedians loved including it in their sets when performing in the state, especially when playing to mixed crowds of locals and tourists. The punchlines always landed. Something about the idea of Delaware, one of the smallest states in the nation, taking such a firm stance on dog hair, felt irresistibly charming. As awareness of the law continued to spread, people began to appreciate its deeper message. Sometimes the seemingly small decisions a community makes say far more about its character than the grand debates. Delaware had chosen to draw a bright line around the dignity of pets, and the simplicity of the ban made it both effective and memorable. While other states debated broader legislation that often got lost in complicated legal language, Delaware's law remained refreshingly straightforward. No selling dog hair, period. And the remarkable part was that the law worked beautifully. It prevented shady markets without burdening honest citizens. It raised awareness without sparking controversy. It protected pets without interfering with daily life. It stood as a quiet triumph of common sense, wrapped in a layer of humour so disarming that even critics couldn't help but smile. People occasionally wondered whether the ban should be updated or expanded, but every legal review reached the same conclusion. The statute remained clear, sufficient, and relevant. Modern fur markets had evolved, but so had consumer expectations. Transparency was more valued than ever. Ethical sourcing had become a major trend. And the law continued to serve as a reminder that Delaware had helped pioneer that shift long before it was fashionable. Through all these years, the ban stayed exactly where it had always been, in the law books, in the public imagination, and in the shared cultural laughter that echoed across dog parks, grooming salons, community halls, fairgrounds, and front porches across the state. It became a strange sort of unity symbol, something everyone knew, everyone understood, and everyone appreciated. even if it mostly served as a catalyst for jokes and stories. By the time new generations came along, the law had become so deeply embedded in Delaware's identity that it felt less like a statute and more like a personality trait of the state itself. Children grew up knowing it as a quirky fact to share with friends from other states. Parents loved explaining the history of it during car rides. Grandparents recounted the early confusion and amusement it caused when it first appeared, and in each retelling the law's purpose remained clear, wrapped warmly in humour, affection and tradition. It wasn't just about preventing the sale of dog hair, it was about declaring in the simplest way possible what Delawareans stood for. They cherished their pets, they protected their welfare, and they embraced their unique quirks instead of shying away from them. As Delaware moved into the modern era, an age of smartphones, online shopping, and endless streams of internet trivia, the dog hair ban took on a new life. What had once been a local oddity, tucked quietly inside the state's legal code, became a recurring star of viral posts, listicles, comedic podcasts, and late-night television jokes. People across the country, and even around the world, stumbled across the claim that Delaware prohibited the sale of dog hair. Most reacted with laughter or disbelief. Some questioned whether it could possibly be true. And inevitably, someone would look it up, scroll through Delaware's statutes, and discover that yes, there it was, written calmly and officially in Delaware Code Title 11, paragraph 1331, the state's solid and unshakable declaration that dog hair had no place in commerce. The modern rediscovery of the law created a strange but delightful cultural loop. Outsiders heard about it, were stunned, checked if it was real, confirmed that it was, and then somehow fell a little bit in love with Delaware for being the kind of place that cared enough to write such a law. And Delawareans, for their part, leaned into the charm of it. They appreciated that one of the quirkiest pieces of legislation in America belonged to them, not out of silliness, but out of an earnest moment of ethical decision-making that had aged in the best possible way. It became increasingly common for Delaware residents to bring up the law when talking about their state. It was a perfect icebreaker at conferences, a fun fact at school presentations, and a guaranteed laugh at family gatherings when relatives from other states visited. It didn't matter if they were at a crab festival, a dog park, a baseball game, or a community barbecue. Someone would eventually mention the ban, and everyone within earshot would react with the same familiar blend of amusement and appreciation. The beauty of the law was that it created no burdens for modern Delawareans. It didn't interfere with daily life. It didn't create confusion. It just sat there, quietly reinforcing the idea that dogs were companions, not commodities. Whereas other states grappled with controversial statutes, Delaware enjoyed a law that made people smile before it made them think. It was the rare piece of legislation that achieved practical effectiveness without stirring up conflict. Instead, it nurtured a sense of unity and shared identity. Yet the law's modern influence stretched much farther than humour. In an era where consumers cared deeply about ethical sourcing, sustainability and transparency, the dog hair ban gained new relevance. Delaware's decision, decades earlier, to draw a strict, bright-line boundary began to be seen as ahead of its time. While other regions debated complex ethical standards for textiles and cosmetics, Delaware already had an unambiguous rule about what was and wasn't acceptable in terms of domestic animal hair. The clarity of Delaware Code Title 11, Paragraph 113.31 quietly stood out as an early example of proactive consumer protection. Dog groomers, too, continued weaving the law into their routines, especially as younger generations discovered it online and came into salons already giggling about it. After brushing out a mountain of fur from a golden retriever or husky, the groomer might theatrically look around, lower their voice, and say, "We'll dispose of the evidence discreetly." The owner would laugh, snap a picture of the fluff pile, and post it online with a caption about accidentally committing a felony in Delaware, even though the law didn't criminalize owning dog hair, only selling it. These posts always generated dozens of comments from surprised friends, many of whom confessed they thought it was a myth until they Googled it. The sense of pride Delawareans felt about the law gained a deeper dimension as conversations about animal welfare grew more mainstream. Advocacy groups began referencing the statute as an example of a simple yet effective measure that made a symbolic statement about protecting companion animals. It became part of presentations, workshops, and educational materials focusing on humane treatment and ethical consumerism. Even though the law specifically targeted the sale of dog hair, its implications resonated across broader discussions about how society values animals. Meanwhile, the cultural mythology surrounding the ban continued expanding in gentle, humorous ways. Writers incorporated it into books as a symbol of Delaware's quirky charm. Podcasters used it as a launching point for discussions about the evolution of strange laws. Filmmakers included nods to it in documentaries about American trivia. Social media creators turned it into skits, imagining black market dog hair cartels with elaborate disguises and trench coats, all set against the completely mundane reality that no one in Delaware was actually trying to sell dog hair in the first place. Teachers found themselves using the law even more frequently as a teaching tool. In civics and government classes, it provided a perfect real-life example of how legislation arises from specific historical contexts, how loopholes are addressed, and how laws evolve, or don't, over time. It helps students understand that even the strangest-sounding laws often came from rational decisions shaped by the issues of their time. And in a world where students often found government dry or overly complex, the dog hair ban sparked laughter, curiosity, and genuine engagement. Some schools even held quirky law days, where students brought in strange but real laws from different states, debated their origins, and compared them for fun. Delaware students almost always brought up the dog hair ban first. Not because it was embarrassing, but because it was unique, memorable, and perfectly harmless. It became something of a badge of honor, a signal that Delaware knew how to mix practicality with personality. Over time, the law also became a point of interest for animal shelters and rescue groups. When promoting responsible pet ownership, organizations occasionally highlighted the ban as part of Delaware's long-standing culture of protecting animals. It reinforced the image of a state where pets were valued as family members. During adoption events, volunteers sometimes joked that all dogs came with free hair and zero market value, as required by law. Even serious discussions about pet protection found room for a smile when referencing the statute. Community events across the state found ways to playfully acknowledge the law. Craft fairs displayed certified sheep wool only signs. Farmers' markets sold Delaware legal fibers. Dog parks hung humorous posters reminding visitors not to engage in fur harvesting activities. These touches added character, reminding everyone that a law doesn't need to be solemn to be meaningful. But the law's journey into modern digital culture cemented its legacy more than anything else. As websites and creators compiled lists of peculiar state laws, Delaware's dog hair ban consistently appeared at the top, drawing millions of views. Comment sections filled with people marveling at the fact that the ban was not only real, but still fully enforceable. Some joked that it was the most relatable law in America. Others praised Delaware for making a humane stance decades earlier than many places considered such issues. Despite its internet fame, the law remained unchanged, unchallenged, and uncontroversial. Every time someone wondered whether it would ever be repealed, Delaware quietly reaffirmed that there was no need. It didn't hinder commerce, it didn't confuse citizens, and it didn't compete with more pressing legislative priorities. It simply stood as a well-crafted rule that had aged gracefully, practical, symbolic, and iconic all at once. In the modern legal code, the wording of Delaware Code Title 11, paragraph 1531 remains refreshingly direct. It states that anyone who sells, barters, or offers to sell or barter the hair of a dog or cat commits an offence. No elaborate exceptions. No dense legal jargon. Just a straightforward declaration that dogs and cats are companions, not sources of commercial fibre. And because it is written so clearly, it continues to hold up without confusion, serving as a timeless example of efficient legislative drafting. Today, the law feels less like an artifact of the past and more like an ongoing story, one that Delawareans continue telling with pride, humour, and a hint of mischief. When families gather for holidays, someone inevitably brings up the ban for the benefit of any out-of-state guests. When tourists visit dog-friendly beaches or stroll through historic towns with their pets, locals occasionally mention the statute just to see the look of delighted surprise cross their faces. The law has become a beloved part of Delaware's personality, a conversation starter that connects strangers and creates shared laughter. Generations of Delawareans have now grown up knowing that their state has one of the most charmingly specific animal protection laws in the country. Parents tell their children the story as they brush their dogs on the back porch, sending little whirlwinds of fur drifting across the yard. Grandparents recount how the law became famous online, sparking discussions far beyond the borders of the state. Teens share memes about it with friends across the country, proud that their home has a law no one else can quite match. And through all of that, the heart of the ban remains clear and constant. It is a promise, a simple, unpretentious assurance that Delaware values its pets. A commitment to drawing ethical boundaries long before they become national conversations. A reminder that compassion, even in legal form, can be both practical and charming. As the state steps further into the future, the dog hair ban continues to do what it has always done: protect animals, prevent confusion, and unite Delawareans in a uniquely joyful way. It stands as a quiet symbol of the state's character, preserved in the pages of Delaware Code Title 11, paragraph 1331, where it will likely remain for many years to come. And as long as it does, Delawareans will keep sharing the story, laughing, nodding, and celebrating the wonderfully odd, wonderfully humane law that defines their small but mighty state.